Wait,
Yeah.
it still says
You're
scheduled.
live.
Now we're live.
Okay.
Now we're live.
We're
Yeah.
live. We're live. Hi.
Yeah.
Live.
Yo.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. And I'd like to welcome whoever's tuning in to Art and Life Somewhere Under the Rainbow. Tonight we've got a panel of three gorgeous young people and myself, to talk about the future of queer Singapore theatre. Yeah, so we'll be going through about a little series of and survey of queer plays in the past of Singapore, like a lot, looking at a lot of work that's done in the 2010s, some by our three guests. And we'll also be, and then we'll open it up for Q&As. You can already start like leaving comments for us. You can already start like sending us like compliments on, our fashion choices, But yeah, this is going to be a really interactive thing. Feel free to send us, like little comments, little questions, and your own ideas about the ways you think queer theatre in Singapore should move into. Yeah, let's start with some self-introductions. Okay, I'm Ng Yi-Sheng. I'm a multidisciplinary writer, activist, poet, playwright. I recently did a work called called Desert Blooms, The Dawn of Queer Singapore Theatre, which was a lecture performance looking at how queer theatre arose in Singapore from 1985 to 1995. And I think that's why Wild Rice wanted me to speak at this. I've also written some queer-themed plays before. Hazwan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Hazwan. So I'm a playwright and I'm a copywriter at Good Stuff. So I write all kinds of different plays and mostly in bilingual, so Malay and English. So also a co-founder of My Interlist Group, Singapore's first playwriting kind of like collective, and also Rupa Collab.
Yeah, I've seen some of your guys' stuff. It's really, taboo breaking. I've also seen you, doing traditional dance. Yeah, you're pretty awesome. Hey, Steph, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I will say I'm not really in the theatre scene per se, but I'm sort of on the fringes of it. I do lots of stuff on stages. I perform poetry. I've been part of many spoken word shows. I do stand-up comedy. I do burlesque and drag, and I also organize shows around those. I've organized the Queer the Cabaret. I've organized my own sort of queer and sort of female-centric comedy night and run a poetry night as well.
Oh, I can see in the comments, Chelsea Kurto at 902 has mentioned that you are writing for Plaid Right as well, which is...
Yes, so I just started, so someone actually said, Chelsea Kurto started so I think the first like queer women and non-binary playwriting group.
Awesome.
So did a short workshop and they were like, now go write a play in a week about from a queer lens. And I was like, this is really cool. It's they're going to have a festival on Zoom on next Tuesday.
Oh, great. I forgot to say, like, we should be doing the very new thing about introducing our preferred pronouns. Mine is he, him. I identify as a gay man. Hazwan, you?
He, him.
Yeah. Steph?
For me, it's she, they, so non-binary, but not super bothered about.
Yeah. Okay, and Kenneth?
Yeah. He, him. That's
Kenneth,
fine.
could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Anyway, hi, I'm Kenneth. I'm an actor, writer, hair and makeup artist, and I'm also a playwright. And some of my works include Let's Get Back Together, 1000 Millennials Crying, and Long Weekend. 2 out of 3 which are queer plays. So maybe that's why I'm here. Anyway, I'm really excited to talk about queer things. So yeah, let's get started.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I should also mention that Kenneth is also the youngest of us. He's the only one here who's actually in his 20s. So I love it. I'm born in 1980, so some people say I'm millennial, but I go like, no, Singapore was behind the trend. If I grew up with friends, I'm a Gen Xer. Sorry. But we're going to start off with a little survey of the history of queer theatre so that we can find out, we can help the audience to understand where did queer theatre begin in Singapore? Could we get the slides up, please? Yeah. Oh yeah, like the cover sheet is actually just from Alfian's 2000 play, the Asian Boys Volume 1 dream play, which he first wrote for Necessary Stage, but was restaged in, I think, 2013 with Wild Rice. That's a photo from the restaging. Alfian's too shy to let us talk about his show, so let's go on to the next slide. All right. Okay, so queer theatre begins in Singapore in the 1980s, in the late 1980s specifically, but it's only, it catches on really fast, as in, by the year 1992, we've got plays in English, Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. And so I thought it would be nice to start talking about Aka, not because it's representative in three ways. First, it's actually written in mother tongue. It's by my friend G. Selva, who runs Avant Theatre now. Two, it was also focusing on trans women. It was about a journalist introducing a trans sex worker, and a lot of these early plays were not actually about gay men or gay women. They were actually talking about trans women, because it wasn't very. This was not long after Bugis Street had closed in 1985. So people's most common perceptions of the queer community were the trans sex workers. And honestly, within the queer community, not a lot of, there wasn't a clear distinction between gay men and trans women often. And three, it was also been restaged. You see, this photo is from the 2014 restaging. I was actually a bit instrumental in this. We tried to have a reading of it, and we went like, okay, the first time it was performed with the playwright as an actor who's a cis man. Let's try having a staging with trans women. And after we did that, they were like, yeah, let's do more of this. And so they've had they restaged this with the actress Sonia Pravina, and they've actually had sequels since then. So there's been a flourishing of queer theatre in that sense, with our old pioneering queer works becoming classics. Oh, could I have the next slide then? Yeah. All right. I said that a lot of queer plays were actually about trans women, and this Private Parts is one of that trend. It was incredibly successful. There was a whole joke about boasting, hey, I finally got tickets to see Michael Chiang's Private Parts. Yeah, it's actually run several times. It's been revived several times, and it's about this cisgender straight man who ends up while playing golf, he gets damage to his penis, and he ends up at a repair center where he meets these upper middle class, not sex workers, these upper middle class trans women and men who are going through this surgery, and he starts to identify them, and he brings them onto his TV show. And it was actually really lauded in its day, because it actually starts off with this idea of Singapore trying to monetize Bugis World and drag queens. So it invites people to laugh at the trans community at the beginning, but then and which is what people were used to, but then it invites them to empathize with them. And that's very good for cisgender audiences, but in the 2018 version, which this was restaged, it really didn't go down well with a lot of transgender people and their friends. They had taglines like, he's a woman, she's a man, place your bets. And Clara Tan at Rice Media wrote a really tough critique of this, saying like, it actually alienates trans people today, which shows like sometimes our classics don't really hold up. Okay, let's go over to our next play, Mergers and Accusations. Steph, would you like to talk about that one?
Yeah, so this was by Eleanor Wong. It was one of the first, possibly the first lesbian play, and it was about, as Eleanor Wong was a lawyer, and this is about lesbian lawyers, and about a particular lesbian lawyer who is sort of closeted and in a sort of trying to figure out if she should marry this man who's her friend out of necessity, but also then meets a lawyer which is interesting, from London, who is very, very out and kind of like falls in love with her. So it's kind of a lot of love triangles. And this is the first of a trilogy. Well,
yeah, it has been incredibly interesting, and it's also it was even translated and performed in Chinese, I believe, but it wasn't Singapore's first lesbian play. Ovidia wrote 2 queer women's plays in 1991. Ovidia U, that is, but the scripts have been lost. Yeah, so it's still a valuable record of the time. Anything else you want to say about this play, Steph?
I think it's also interesting that it was, back in 1993, and it was when I feel, the lesbian culture was very invisible then, and we suddenly have this play which basically puts lesbians the front and center, and which I think is really interesting.
I interviewed Eleanor, and she told me, like, it wasn't publicized as a lesbian play. People went in, they saw this office lawyer dynamic, and this, the guy on the play, played by Lim Yu Bing, flirting with the lesbian lawyer, and then she reveals that she's lesbian, and he says, "I don't care, I still want to have a baby with you," and that the story follows from there. So it's actually it starts off with a guy trying to accept a lesbian marriage of convenience, and then it's actually, they actually try and have a poly relationship which doesn't work out. It's interesting to read it by today's sexual politics. Anything else you'd like to say?
The Chelsea Curto of the Queer Women's Book Club says they just did they read it and they did a staged reading over Zoom recently.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, it still stands up. It still holds up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Now, Kenneth, would you like to tell us about our next play, A Language of Their Own by Che Yu?
Yes. Okay, so basically this play was staged twice. The first time was in 1994, and the second one was in 2006 by Checkpoint Theatre. It basically follows the life of a same-sex couple after they've ended their relationship due to one of them having HIV. So it was also one of the earliest Singapore queer plays that really discussed the whole HIV/AIDS pandemic, which really ravaged the community back then, and also really gave a more human touch to the kind of heartbreak that the community was experiencing, rather than having people read off like statistics and numbers and scientific facts of like the newspapers, for example. For me, it was a really interesting play because how I was introduced to it was I was in JC, I know, very young. I had a senior actually tell me it was essential reading for all queer people in Singapore, especially queer people wanting to go into the arts. So he introduced it to me. It's like very word of mouth, very hush-hush. I had to go to the library to borrow it. I didn't even dare to buy it or didn't even dare to bring it back home. So I would always read it like in secret. And it was quite a turning point for me, because then I realized that a lot of the things I was going through, a lot of things that I felt inside me were quite universal, and that I was not alone. So that was a very comforting thing to me, and it will always have that sort of special place in my heart. Yeah.
One interesting thing about this is that it's not about Singaporeans, it's about Asian Americans. It's about, and they're being assimilated. I think Che Yu might still have been a Singapore citizen when he wrote it, but he was writing overseas. He did actually write Singapore's first produced queer play, also about HIV, As If He Hears, which was supposed to be staged in 1988, but got censored and was. And so he had to rewrite it and restage it in 1988 or 89 under Action for AIDS. So HIV was really instrumental to the birth of queer theatre in Singapore. And it's interesting as well, because even though this show isn't queer, it doesn't have Singaporean characters in it. It got so much acclaim in the USA. It was directed by Ong Keng Sen too. And so there was all this desire to stage it. And so I got to see the 2006 first staging in Singapore, and it was greatly beloved. It's been reclaimed even by the Straits Times as a landmark Singapore play. Okay, so Kenneth, you'd also like to talk about the next play, Completely Without Character.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so this was a one-man show by Paddy Chu, who was Singapore's first openly HIV positive person. And it was staged by TNS, who interviewed Paddy over a sort of period of time, really. And for me, even though I wasn't old enough to watch the 1999 version, when I saw the archival footage, even then it was one of the most powerful pieces of queer theatre that I have seen in my life, because it just really resonated. It was so raw. It was just so honest. And I think more so than just Paddy's iconic sort of like figure and status was what he did inside the play. It was really revolutionary that he incorporated the sort of live IRC chat segment where the audience and people could actually write in with direct questions, and he would answer them as part of a segment inside the show. And that had never been done before, especially back in 1999. I mean, even now we're talking about digitization in the arts, right? But back then, TNS and Paddy were already doing it, and it brought a completely unpredictable sort of element into the theater. You know, that sort of heightened sense of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Who's going to ask what question? And he would directly address these questions on stage, which I thought was so powerful and so immediate. And, the funny thing is that the first time I actually heard about Paddy was through my dad, who went to the same school as he did. And it actually, him being HIV positive, shaped a lot of my dad's negative perceptions of the LGBTQ community, because for years after that, he recalled this performance that Paddy did and sort of all the things he did in the news, and how he just couldn't stand it and didn't want his own children to become like that. Yeah.
I think,
So speaking of archives, actually, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, one more thing. I was doing a bit of research on Paddy Chu and found out he was actually used to help to run the Boom Boom Room. Was where he worked.
Yeah.
So he has a lot of experience
about it.
creating.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all these connections.
Amazing. Like back then, I think the scene was so close knit, and that like everybody knew everybody, and it's just amazing when you like make those connections across works.
Oh yeah.
I think
I think you'd like to talk about how it was revived in a way by Zihan, right? Next slide.
Yep. So Without was basically a sort of restaging of the piece by Zihan. And this one I actually had a little bit of involvement in because I was the research assistant for. It was basically him deconstructing the archival footage from the performance, and there was just one video of it. We were trying to sort of recreate the sort of performance of a person who's no longer with us, and how that would affect how the audience would receive that sort of performance, which is really interesting because it also involved a lot of people who knew him back in the day, and they were roped into the project. It was really interesting because it was divided basically into two performance areas in Standard 42. Those who have been there know it's like a top level and like a basement rehearsal room level. So in the upstairs, you can sort of sit there in the dark and watch Paddy's footage of the performance being played back to you as you hear someone downstairs reading a voiceover of the actual script. And the person reading the actual script would be someone that actually knew him or had worked with him on the play. So the audience members were free to roam, and you could choose either to stay upstairs and hear Paddy speak, or go downstairs. And so it was this brightly lit room, really clinical, and to be surrounded by all these news articles about Paddy. So it's very interesting because then the audience would divide themselves into those who could actually sit there and watch him speak, as opposed to going downstairs and calling like a timeout, because for some people it was really too overwhelming. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Nabila Saeed at 917 says, my mom loves the Boom Boom Room. Which makes me feel old because I used to go to the Boom Boom Room.
Oh my goodness.
I wish I could.
My parents used to go to the Boom Boom Room and stuff.
Okay. All right. Could we have the next slide? I realized oddly in this survey where we are only giving two. This is the only play we're talking about from the 2000s, which is actually quite strange because the 2000s was a period when there was a lot of queer theatre. Assessments were had changed, and also queer playwrights began saying, okay, we don't need to portray ourselves just as victims anymore. We can also look at our society and show like, yeah, we actually have problems in our community where sometimes assholes to each other. And this play was an example, hitting on women. It started by Ovidia Yu, which this play won the Life Theatre Awards and Theatre Idols with Action Theatre. It starts off with this woman recalling her dead lover, and her dead lover appears to her, and there's a lot of comedy. People are laughing. They're we think this is such a cute, cool, endearing couple, and then gradually we find out that her lover is a horrific domestic abuser and mental psychological abuser, and yeah, it's a really hard-hitting play. It was all the more remarkable because I think it was staged in 2007, which, same year as Alfian's Asian Boys Volume 3, and the same year as there was the first attempt to repeal 377A. And so it was part of this moment of queer theatre, which was actually going into politics which had things that had never been said before, really. And sadly, it's only been staged once. All right. Could we have?
I had one more thing to say about it.
Yeah.
It's that, I think I feel this was restaged at some point at the Esplanade, but I'm not sure because I remember watching it not in 2007, but I can't remember where. Maybe it's excerpt. But there's a best-selling book out now called In the Dream House that I recently. It's by Carmen Maria Machado, and it's about domestic abuse and lesbian relationships. And one thing that kept coming up, this writer was saying, is that there is nothing written about domestic abuse and lesbian relationships. And so it's pretty, and she looked everywhere for like writing and like literature, history, research about it, and found there was very little. And then I realized this play exists. It's like she would not have found it because it's a small play from Singapore, but it's still, because it's domestic violence and lesbian relationships is so hardly talked about. So it's quite wild that there is an entire play that really delves into it, and there's still not that much art created about it outside of that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. In Singapore, we think that we're following outside trends, but actually sometimes we don't even realize the fact that we're ahead of the trend. We're sometimes the first people talking about these things. Actually, okay, let's move into the 2010s with some work that's actually written by some of us. Steph, why don't you talk about this?
Yeah, so Stephanie Chan and friends. So this was actually a spoken word theater piece. So and mostly it's actually by people who are not really writers and not really poets. Some of them have become poets later on. So essentially the idea was for the Biennale. It started for the Singapore Biennale. There was a thing called Singapunk Biennale where they said punks got the substation, and my friend who's in the punk scene, Vanessa Victoria, realized there's a lot of amazing stuff being created, but nothing that was really for women. And she was kind of like, trust me, I'll get a bunch of queer women together. Not all of us are identify as women anymore. Get a bunch of queer women together, and we're going to write a show, and we'll sell it out, I promise. And it sold out because it was just about the queer experience growing up in an all-girls convent school. Basically, she was just like, all of you have been to all-girls schools, all of you are queer, write about it. And so we just came up with a whole bunch of things. And we sold out, and we had no idea that everyone, like all the queer women in Singapore, were really, really hungry for this kind of thing. Also, I think it was also interesting that we did, so mass hysteria is because there was this one piece that was about a mass hysteria thing that happened, and it was really cool because it was about this one person who is trans now and like was Butch back then. It was kind of about how there's mass hysteria during this netball game because someone saw Pontianak, and the Pontianak, the only person who couldn't see the Pontianak was the Butch. Pontianaks only go after femmes or something like that.
Oh my goodness.
So it's all kinds of like weird, specific stories about growing up and like being queer in all-girls schools, and then we restaged it for Indignation later that year, and created a lot of stuff. We have an entire 8-person piece, or like 8-person piece about the different parts of the vagina talking to their owner. And So that was my first area.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also very interesting how it's not. I mean, Zhe Han's restaging of Without was also an intersection between visual art and theatre, and this one was an intersection with literature and theatre, and to an extent visual art as well. But I think because it was at one point part of the Biennale, was it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, all right. And let's move on to the next slide. Oh, yes. Hazwan, you've been awfully silent recently. No. Oh, sorry. Kenneth, it's still you, Kenneth.
Oh, yes, it's still me. Okay, so this was a play. Let's get back together. It was a play I wrote back in 2014, which we independently staged, and then it was later commissioned for restaging by Wild Rice. There was basically a documentary theatre piece which interviewed over 60 members from the LGBTQ community, both people who were really well recognized and people also who were really in the closet who had to even do the interviews anonymously. So, you have drag queens, activists, people from the transgender community, religious figures, and it was also, for us, was really important to keep it multilingual. So even the actors that we got on board could speak more than just English or just English and Chinese, because we felt that just at that point of time, looking back, there weren't a lot of queer works which had actually gone out to the community and sort of done this broad survey of how it's changed in the past decade. And we felt at that point of time, queer politics was going through a sort of change, because that 2014 was the year basically that the Wear White movement came about.
Yes.
So it was, as you can imagine, it was very difficult to get funding. But in the end, we did manage to privately get it all funded off the ground. So which we're really glad about, because then we sort of have an archive that we can all look back to now to see what was going on at that point of time. Yeah. And also it was done in really close consultation with the community. So we had a lot of private focus group sessions, them coming in, sort of the people who even gave the interviews sitting and watching the actors playing them back and then telling us whether they felt comfortable with how they were portrayed. So it was very important that we had that step in rather than take the creative controls from the people who gave us the material now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Hazwan, sorry, I've been you've been shut out for a while. Could you take the next piece? This is Hawa by Johnny John John.
Yeah. So Hawa is by Johnny John John. It was staged in 2015 by it's in Malay and English. I feel like that's important to point out. It was first staged in 2015 by Hash Theatrics, but I actually watched the Singapore Theatre Festival one by Wild Rice. And then interestingly, I think it created an entry point. Okay, so for me, Hawa is about this woman, right, who had to suddenly bury her lover, which in the synopsis, by the way, because I looked it up, it's called Her Close Friend and Companion. And I feel like this is purposely written that way, right? I think it's to welcome people into the play. And I think, so just the background for those who may or may not know. So I think in Islam, we have to bury a dead, so that you can't do anything else, that you can't cremate them or whatever. So it's like a belief thing. So for me, that part kind of stood out a bit because of how this person who's non-Malay, who kind of converted, I think she admitted in the play somewhere, converted because she wanted to be together with her partner, because her partner was a devout Muslim, now has to take on this Islamic rituals. And she has her own personal feelings about the religion and stuff like that, and how it feels about queer topics. So I think for me, what I liked about Hawa, or rather what John did by using the strategies and the tactics that he used, I think he created an entry point for Muslims, right? For people who might not be ready for queer topics in a Malay-speaking context, right? And I think that created an entry point because of the whole it's a bit distant, because she's not Malay, right? She sort of married into the religion and stuff like that. And I think one of the issues that stood out to me was whether she converted for the sake of it, as opposed to whether she converted because she loved the religion. And this is actually an issue that everyone in the Muslim community kind of faces. So interracial especially, So I think that created sort of like a unique entry point for those who maybe I'm not here to talk about the LGBT issue, but okay, I can relate. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd also could you also talk about your own play? Next slide, please.
Oh, hi. So Dongpang is a play I wrote in 2017. So that was the year, I think, I don't know, maybe that wasn't the year that we started Mind to Lace Group, but it was our first kind of production together, because we started a team as a kind of, I call it a tuition center for playwrights. Yeah, so we kind of just wanted to write with other playwrights and kind of have a space where we can critique each other's works. And then Center 42, because we sit there and they are kind of like our home, right? Center 42 kind of gave us a brief, or they engaged us and said would you want to do something for call it late night texting? Yes, in 2017. So just a background about this play. I'm going to read the synopsis again. So it's called Two Girls, 2 Hours, 2 Wheels Across the Causeway. Jana and Farah have been close friends for 15 years, but haven't met each other in 5. Since Jana became a married woman. So Jana is the one in the tudung. And they decided to catch up and take a little ride to JB, where they both actually got stuck. So Farah gave her a ride to JB on a bike, because bike's faster, right, into JB, and it's 2 hours. But they got stuck because the bike broke down. And because the bike broke down in JB, they were forced to kind of reconcile certain issues that they didn't talk about when they left each other 5 years ago. So for me, I think talking about tactics and strategies, right? I think for me as a brown person, I kind of had to find ways for people to kind of look at it as more than just, oh, this one is a lesbian play, So for me, I use puns and humor. That's my go-to tactic, because I like seeing people laugh and I like seeing audiences laugh, right? Because at the end of the day, you laugh with your friends. So I want to create that kind of environment. And then one of the jokes that Farah used on Jana, I remember because people were laughing. So Jana was kind of pacing about, and then because bike broke down, what am I going to do? My boss is going to kill me. And then Farah just says, "Are you looking for Jana?" So Jana is actually the name for heaven, and it's a joke that a lot of Malay people or Muslim people use in Singapore, and I think that got people laughing, and they got kind of oh my god, I can relate to that. I see my friend saying that kind of joke, and it's a very Malay thing, right? It's not a lesbian thing. Yeah, so for me that was one of my kind of ways of doing that. It's kind of seeing people having to work through a deck. Advertising, right? So people having to force themselves to work through a deck in the night, and then they're just drinking wine. So they're trying to make it palatable for themselves, right? Another point of entry, so I try to make it relatable, because the characters themselves, I feel like in my writing, I try to kind of mirror people I see or people I know. So one of them, for Jana, she's a civil servant, and then for Farah, she works in a restaurant, and she works at bars, a bit kind of non-committal jobs, right? And then, but they both are happy. It's just that I think because of the Malay lens, a lot of the civil servantness of it all is seen as very high regard, right? Because a lot of people come from, there are people who come from low income families, and they see as if I study hard enough and I get in a government job, I'm set because I get stability, right? But then there's
I think we've got to move on, Hazwan. Could we go to the next slide, which is actually something Chelsea Courto has called the most powerful LGBTQ piece she saw. She said she saw the Chinese production of this at Center 42 last year.
So this is created by Tan Li Ting, and who is a Butch person, and I think originally they wanted Pretty Butch to sort of be about just Butch women, and wanted to interview lots of Butch women, talk about the Butch experience in Singapore. But I think it kind of ended up becoming, I think they failed to find enough Butch women wanting to talk or something. And kind of ended up being about masculinity. And so you kind of see on the poster, so there's three stories going on. So one of them is actually Dion Young, who's an amazing performer, did a one-woman show, also does stand-up. and was kind of doing a monologue about her experience as like sort of a butch looking person in theater as an actor as well. The fictional characters are, there's a lesbian couple and one of them is Butch, and the Butch Butch woman is pregnant and has to grapple with her own masculinity while doing something that is traditionally very female, and the whole like complexities that come out with that. Like, what if someone thinks you're just a fat man, for example? Like, how do you stay sort of butch and assert your masculinity when there's like no roadmap for you? And then the other one is about two men who are friends, and then one of them has gynomastia, where basically men grow breasts, and how he grapples with that. And so basically him and his friend sort of like grapple with their masculinity. And so all of these are just like sort of they're not exactly related, but all like intersecting sort of like sub stories. And I think it's probably one of the very few, I could be wrong here, one of the very few portrayals of a butch woman who is pregnant in theater. If not like a butch, if not like a lesbian parents in Singapore theater.
Okay, and let's just do one more piece. And Hazwan, could you talk about this play, Tango?
Yeah, okay. So just very quickly, I think we all kind of know about Tango because it was written by Joel Tan, and I think we covered it in another panel about race as well, I think. So for me, so Joel's, kind of like story was about this married couple who came back with an adopted son. And then there was just a lot of kind of relationship between them and the grandfather, and then how the kid's gonna adapt in a Singapore context where having queer parents it's not celebrated, or it's not something that is common here, right? So for me, I feel like that was interesting because I think when I watched it first, one of the things that I kind of thought about was, okay, I can't believe that this is staged because it's really quite. I feel like on the vein of the things that we talk about, right? Brought on a very public light, especially for queer issues, I feel. But I think what he did quite well was to kind of find like a family element of it. So I feel like that to me spoke out as a true kind of central theme for the whole play. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and thanks so much. So we've had a survey of 13 queer Singaporean theatre productions, and let's finally get round to like the discussion and the questions that have been burgeoning in the live comments. Like one of the early questions that Chelsea began to ask about, Chelsea Kurto at 919 asked was, I would be interested to know what the panelists think about queer theatre for queer people versus queer theatre for straight people versus queer theatre for all people. Yeah, is there a difference? Should there be? Yeah, it's a big question. Any takers?
Big. I guess maybe I can share an experience. I'm probably not directly answering the question, but I thought it might be a good experience to share. So one of the plays that I did for the 20-something Theatre Festival was called Long Weekend. And it was a queer play, we didn't explicitly say it was a queer play in any of the marketing. I mean, of course, the queer people looked at it and went, of course it's a queer play, but most people didn't. And so after the show, because every day I'd be with the audience, like sitting down there sneakily, like listening to what people are saying. And this girl was whining to her friend, and she was like, how dare they make all these jokes and only the queer people were laughing, and I didn't get it at all. And like, they have a duty to like help me understand. And she's like, I must talk to the playwright. And then so I was like, hi, I'm like, do you have any questions?
I'm here.
And so she was quite frustrated that she felt very left out. And I guess when I sort of went home and I reflected on it with the team, I personally felt that like it was quite entitled to feel like every play that you go in should be watered down into a particular manner that's palatable, that's accessible to everybody. Because I think sometimes plays don't set out to be accessible to everyone in that sort of sense. Like, we don't deliberately try to exclude, but if the experience is so specific to a particular community, then for me as a writer, I would always try to keep it specific to that community to honor the reality of the lived experience.
I think I guess for me, my own I speak very not necessarily queer theatre, but sort of queer stand up and poetry. I think a lot of queer poetry is written for queer people. Like Mass Hysteria was definitely made for the queer community, and I think you can afford to do that if you're like not in a major theatre. I don't know about like a massive theatre. You want to sell tickets. So I think that ends up having to do stuff. So maybe it's like more experimental theatre can be for queer people. And yeah, for myself, my motivation is to write stuff for queer people to see themselves more so than telling straight people, hey, we exist.
Hazwan, do you have any comments about this?
Lots, I feel. I think for me, because I feel in my life I've had to kind of navigate a lot of identities, right? And then I've had to make my different identities relatable to different people. So one, which is an obvious one, is like my brownness, right? That I have to make it relatable, and then my queerness, which comes as another layer. So I have to kind of like, it feels like I'm a music player that I'm just like adjusting the levels. But I think in writing, I feel like if I were you, I'd be really, really pissed off in that situation, because I feel like we come to theater kind of wanting to find out more about something. I want to kind of learn, or I feel like also being entertained. And I feel like there's also, moments where it's also post-show dialogue, which I feel a lot of theater productions do. But I think that's the politics of it all, right? Like finding the way of how do we navigate this, because we don't live in a queer world, right? We live in a world where we share with everybody. So then how do we make the issues that we want to talk about palatable, or at least if it's not the issue, how do we create these entry points for people? And I think that's kind of what I kind of touched on the other plays that I talked about, right? Which is a very hard thing, right? Because it's like you have to think about. I feel like playwriting is already so hard, right? Like I don't know for me lah, right? Because I feel like I'm working on a full length now, and then I'm just like, how do you all do this? Yeah. So
that's why I write lecture performance, because the play is so difficult.
So it's like after that one layer of like, okay, now I have to figure out my different audiences, right? But it could be like a whole holistic thing. Like I feel like what Steph said kind of also plays a lot of part. I think the marketing of it and how you couch the conversations that you want to have. Because I think now we live in a very social world, right? Social media is there. And it's very kind of like a way to instigate certain conversations or make people kind of feel prepared, kind of like prepare their mind for it. Like, okay, this play is going to be about this. I might not understand everything. Maybe I should bring someone I know, or maybe later I can talk to the playwright. So there could be some things, right? But then again, we all know that this, like, we can do everything right, but sometimes people just, I need you to explain it to me, and I feel entitled that I need. So I think it's picking your battles.
Yeah. I think it also has a lot to do with the production company. I mean, larger production company, for example, with Pandemonium, when they do it Fun Home and Tango, I think because they know they're filling up a big theater, they know that they don't normally do queer plays. They were like, yeah, we've got to try and aim for a wider mainstream audience. And there is value in doing that as well, in specifically trying to create something that will educate people. And but we shouldn't feel obliged to do that all the time.
Yeah, especially when it's specific, right? Like Kenneth was saying.
Sorry, there was just this wonderful comment by Jean Mark, which said, wait till they watch an Ong Keng Sen play, because it's like, you cannot.
Yeah.
If you come to theater expecting it to be spoon-fed, well, then you could do that at SRT, you could do that at Pandemonium, you could do that at a lot of Wild Rice, but not with every director.
Yeah.
Oh, but related to this, whole, queer straight dynamic, I'd like to pull up 939 by Steph Mark. She was saying, can cis-het people write queer plays? Should they be allowed to? Any takers for this one?
I'm gonna say it out there. This one damn hard to answer.
Well, the
Yeah.
very easy answer is that a lot of the early queer plays, queer works of literature in Singapore. For example, The Lady of Soul and Her Ultimate S Machine by Tan Hao, which is queer and weird in all sorts of ways. Tan Hao is a straight cisgender married Chinese man. It's and it's still really quite beloved for its camp aesthetics. This play, so that portrays a gay minister of state and a gay permanent secretary, with a secret love affair, and a sex worker with a robot, and it's so. Actually, I do. I mean, I genuinely do think. I genuinely do think that a cisgender heterosexual person should not feel afraid about including queer people in their story. But it's harder if they decide is this play going to be about queerness? Because but on the other hand, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think for me it's because for mainstream media, right? We kind of get displayed a lot of kind of queer characters that are very kind of TV trope or very wardrobe kind of so I think that's where a lot of the apprehension comes from. So for me, the question is also back to whether research is done, right? Whether you've consulted the right people and whether you've checked with the communities that you want to represent. Because Kenneth's Let's Get Back Together, right? It's about that. Because if you don't do the work and then people kind of say this is not representative, then you cannot say that.
And I also feel actually sorry.
Just a small point. I think they should definitely be allowed to, but I think they should just be held to a higher standard because they're writing about. Just have more scrutiny, and they should be. I think they should. That's the sort of the price they have to pay for wanting to write about an experience that's not theirs. Also, because I had this discussion before. Queer people, when they write plays, they have. Often people are going to say that queer plays are queer, whether they are or not, or people are going to accuse them. But straight people have possibility, the privilege of writing a play about queer people, but actually saying this is not actually about queer people. These are just queer characters in my play, and depoliticizing it and sort of thing.
Oh yeah, Miriam Chong has a wonderful comment. When cishet people write queer characters, we get glee, and I don't know how to feel about that. But honestly, Kenneth, sorry. A lot of queer people
people. A lot of people ask me that okay, well, I want to write about a queer character, but I don't know how, or I really want to write it from a queer person's perspective, which is a sort of slightly different take on that. And I always tell them, well, why don't you write about queer people from a straight person's perspective? From how you see the world, and use that as your entry point. Since we were talking about entry points earlier, use that as an entry point to then access that world, and be very upfront with the fact that you are not a queer person trying to write about queer issues, and that I think I wouldn't say it excuses you from making mistakes, but it sort of clarifies your position instead of you just trying to pass it off as a queer thing and trying to pretend you know this, you know that, dropping in references here and there when that you don't actually get. It's sort of it's sort of like having this straight girl at the gay bar trying to appropriate gay lingo, and then they try to use this hey, work, I have a gay friend, I sort of know this, and then you actually don't. So I feel it's always just be honest about where you come from and what you don't know, and be very open to receiving criticism, especially from queer people, because the spaces available for queer people to tell stories are so limited. So that when you as a straight person go and try to write a queer piece, and then let's say you cannot commission for a spot in some place, and it's alamak, you're taking away the opportunity from an actual queer person. Even for me, once I've written the 2 or 3 queer plays, and then people started asking me oh, can you write this other queer play and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of times I would just say no. Because if even I as a queer person, if I don't have anything worthwhile to sort of contribute to the space, I would always say, hey, go look at this other playwright who hasn't gotten the opportunity, but their writing really tackles a lot of very important issues. Give it to them. Sometimes people think I just because I did drag like 4 or 5 times, like I'm a drag queen, and then they try to hire me for drag events. I said, no, don't ask me, ask the drag queen. Ask a drag queen who's working and who needs, this is their, bread and butter. So I feel it's about really just being honest with ourselves, and like, am I taking up space that I shouldn't be taking up, or that someone else better could have taken up?
Yeah, I think it's also really, like, we shouldn't assume that, as a gay man, I don't necessarily know how to write a trans woman or a bisexual person or someone of a gay person of a different race. So we should also check ourselves.
Yeah. I think, sorry, just to add on one more bit. I think on the Glee bit, right? I just want to appeal to non-queer people or queer people with privilege, that we need people with privilege. It's how you use a privilege, right? Because the Glee thing is very it's confirmed, it's super mainstream. But then people started realizing and seeing them in TV, and trans characters seeing them actually on TV, trans people, right? And then these issues get spoken about. They might not be the best, but I feel like we need people with privilege who can have the money and have the ability and have the access to do stories in public space.
Allies, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right. Jason Wee asks about queer theatre futures. What are some of the kinds of performance, not even theatre maybe, that you would like to see made or written that perhaps haven't been written? Yeah. I mean, Stephanie, this feels like, you could perhaps start to talk about the kind of alternative theatre things you've been doing already.
I guess, so there's a lot of, I guess I'll talk about what I want to see first, which I think I would like to see more, queer stand-up, more queer, I guess, more queer stand-up, sort of like more, I guess, experimental queer stuff, people doing more interdisciplinary stuff, more lesbian stuff, non-binary stuff, non-binary stories, lesbian stories. I still think there's not, we can always use more stories about like women in performance and in art, and especially queer women, because I think still there'll not be enough for a long time.
Yeah, and trans people. It's like trans people have been this objectified in our theatre a lot, but how many trans directors and playwrights do we have in our Hazwan, Kenneth, anything to add to this? The kind of theatre that
I would like to see. Well, I personally would like to see a lot more queer theatre, firstly in non-conventional theatre spaces, because I think that's where a lot of queer people go instead of the theatre sometimes. Secondly, I also want to see queer performances that are really unabashedly like queer, like gender fuck sort of like queer, like turn the place inside out, because we see a lot of that overseas, and there's stuff here like Baby Boy, there's stuff here like Riot and all that kind of stuff, but there's always space for more. And I think where the conversation is at in 2020, I think we should be pushing for stuff like this, maybe even inside a theater. As hard as it is to imagine like Esplanade having something like this, for example, I honestly would love to see something just so queer that people just stare at it and go like, oh my god, this is crazy. It's like on acid. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah. Hazwan, any comments?
I think just to build on Kenneth's point, I feel a lot of people think that just because it's super queer fuck, right? Like it becomes very kind of like, is this even theatre? Or is this even a performance? Yeah. But I feel like
entering the room is already theatre.
Yeah,
exactly, right? And I feel like we build up this kind of like, oh, the theatre is this like shrine, right? And to an extent it is, but like at the same time, it's meant for people to see themselves, right? Yeah. And I think for me, personally, I feel like, I want to see more brown voices, right? I want to see more brown characters, not between the different like one Malay person or one Indian person who is like actually Indian. There's so many kinds of Indian people. We force them to take Tamil as one in Singapore. When there's like people who take Hindi or the native tongue is Hindi. So those kind of like intersections that are actually we're so unique. Why do we want to like hide that away? So I feel like
I think just like more complex stories and more complex like types of performance and narratives that are.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on? Nabila Syed had a really interesting proposal here. We've heard of feminist rehearsal spaces before because it can be such a patriarchal space. Just wondering if there can be a movement towards queer rehearsal spaces / queer theatre making. What would that look like to you?
I think firstly, before we even think about how that would look like, I would ask who are the gatekeepers of this space? Because, you know, it really determines the kind of queer theater that you make. If it's all just gay men, Chinese, you know, like skinny, you know, it's very problematic because it's going to be a certain kind of theater. So I think it needs to be very diverse. And, you know, I think another question is, yeah, who's going to gatekeep such a rehearsal space? Is it a theater company? Is it a collective? Is it like public? Do we vote on who leads a space like that? Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can guess my experience with this, like the queer women non-binary thing, playwriting group called Plaidwright. I think there's definitely like a huge difference, like in our like Zoom meeting that we had, just being in a place with all people that look like me in a sense of like queer women, non-binary people, and just knowing that you all come from sort of not exactly the same experience, but similar points of view, similar experiences is very, very powerful. And I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Or any further comments about that? Because I think Nabila has a really interesting comment on 9:55.
Yeah, we will do that.
Yeah. Like, because, does the move towards presenting more theatre online allow for more freedoms for queer performance makers? And I think that this isn't just about COVID-19. This is, I think, about the age of YouTube, because we are, you know, like what made Mona and Hirsi famous, and Pretty Please as well, you know, who's a queer ally.
Yeah.
I would say there's nothing like watching queer people be queer, like in real life. I mean, of course, nothing replaces that, just like with all theater and liveness. But I think if it means that, you know, sometimes the boundary can be pushed further in the online space, then why not? I think we should all be embracing something online anyway. You know, whether it's going to replace liveness or not, you know, it's not the question, but can we embrace it as another form of theater? Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I see this question, I just think about not having to apply for a license to do a YouTube video.
Yeah.
Which is definitely like something freeing that I've been realizing during the circuit breaker.
Yeah, and the fact that some things like YouTube and TikTok allowed like younger people who with less experience to start up initiatives that we wouldn't have been seen before. Like, yeah, it's always a newer technology. It's ironic. Like looking at the 90s, I was amazed at how young the people were who were starting the theater companies and writing the plays back then. But I think it's because there wasn't enough, very much infrastructure back then. And same with when you have, online subversive online stars today who are, they didn't have people who were already taking up a space before them.
Yeah.
Any other comments
I think it's
about?
so interesting that you brought up the idea of like TikTok and all these people having so much more access to the art making process, which is really interesting because then, on one hand, you have a rehearsal process that maybe takes 6 months, like a grant that you have to go and apply for this, you got to hire actors, as opposed to something like you can just go onto Facebook and type out, So when I think for me, when I think about what needs to be written, I also think about when does it need to be written. Is it something so topical and so urgent that needs to be tackled like within this week? If so, then I'm not going to say, let me go write a play about it. I'm probably just going to go on Facebook and tweet about it. If someone needs funds, like if someone's been kicked out of their house, don't write a play about it, go help them and find them a place to stay. But on the other hand, then with that longer rehearsal process, you can sort of look at broader arcs and trends that are happening in the world and really take that time to think about, which think about, okay, if this play is going to take 6 months, what is the world going to look like in 6 months? Like, where do you see this thing headed there? So that by the time your play is done, you would have considered that in your process. And when it comes out, it's no longer as redundant as it might have been. That's what I always think.
Yeah. I think on top of that, like, it's an interesting question, firstly, because I think, like, how do you experience theater online, right? Like, how do we navigate that even? Because I feel even now there's still kind of like a debate, right? Like, oh, I still can't see this as theater, even though it's the same play online. It's just another documentation of a theater world, but it's a different experience. Then how, right? So what then is do we consider theater online, and what, because I feel like in terms of queer content, I don't think we need to champion anything, right? Because I feel like a lot of queer people now are proud of their voices, right? TikTok and Twitter and Facebook, people are speaking out, they're taking action.
Yes.
So now then, what is theater then? How do we form that online, right? I think that's a difficult question.
Yeah,
but I think it's good that we shouldn't allow genre to define us too much. I mean, we've got folks among us doing drag, burlesque, dance, performance RTE things, and just like with literature, genre is something that's for marketing that might be holding us back. So so let's okay, it's been an hour, and we are there any further questions that folks want to bring up among us?
Let me see.
Becca DeBus at 10:01 has an interesting comment. I think Becca has commented to me about this problem of there isn't this. Actually, doing drag online, it doesn't have the same kick, and I do think there is that very valuable thing about going into a physical space and seeing everyone, that there are all these people who are who are like you in sorry.
Shui at 10:01, she talked about how RuPaul helped sort of bring queer culture to a larger audience because it was accessible online. And I think that's a really good point, because I think even for my parents, the way they've encountered queer culture, a lot of times, like, if you ever tell her to go buy a ticket and watch a queer play, it's a very uncomfortable conversation that requires so much more emotional labor, as opposed to having something online where people can sort of take their own time and carve out their own space to sort of process it in themselves. Like, maybe they take 2 weeks to process it. Fine. I mean, for me, drag was something that I encountered online first, because when I was younger, I guess I was too ignorant to look for it, or know where to look for it, or know it when I even saw it.
I actually think censorship is applied in different with different levels of pressure in Singapore. Literature, people don't read, so less censorship. Plays, okay, there's more censorship, but as long as since not so many people are watching. But TV, that's the area which is subject to the most censorship. And I think we've had one token person in faculty who came out that the TV show. So it would be great if we had more queer representation on TV. But on the other hand, it is ironic that Netflix managed to give us access to queer which wasn't even really the result of a campaign. It just sort of happened because there was literally that pink dot ad going, someday we'll be able to be a straight couple watching gay couples make out on TV. And it happened.
I think I'm just going to touch on very quick two things. One on Becca's point and another thing, right? So there's no censorship in the sense that we need to send to IMDA for online shows, right? to a certain extent. But I think there's a lot of other things that goes on online that we don't know about, like the algorithm of Facebook and the algorithm of YouTube and TikTok, and like around the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of TikTok users were talking about the movement, and then their videos get downplayed by TikTok itself. And TikTok wouldn't admit this, but a lot of people were like testing it out, and so there's other forms of censorship that's even might be even insidious, right? Because it might be based on like public comments or public reporting, which is even worse because there's no, so there's that. And then secondly, I think for Becca's point, I completely agree, because I think people don't really see or realize that the equipment to make us look good on camera is a lot. It just takes a lot of money. If you see all the, I think people who do live telecasts now for news, and in their homes, they have to buy a lot of equipment, and if they have to rent equipment from their workplace just to make sure they have the right lighting, and actually it's quite expensive for the maker itself. So you save some money somewhere, but actually you spend a lot on certain things. To get it to a quality that you're proud of and that people want to watch.
Okay, I think let's wrap things up with a last question that will bring us back to, I think, the original theme of this. Ivan Heng, hello Ivan, asks to all the panelists, what was the first theatre show you saw, and what are you working on now? Wait, is it the first theatre show? I think the first time you asked this, it was the first LGBT play. Yeah, so I think you first asked about the first LGBTQ themed show that we saw. Yeah, it's hard to remember. Yeah, like
I think the one that stands out for me most, because I think it was my first queer Singapore theatre show that I remember, was Joel Tan's the one about the gay boy who died and sails off in a boat.
Oh yeah, family outing.
Family outing, yes.
Yeah.
Family outing.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was with my dad.
That's a very specific description.
Yes, it sails in a boat.
Yeah, staged by Wild Rice, one of his first big like proscenium theatre shows as well. And hasn't Joel done all of us proud? Yeah. Okay. I can't really remember myself, but I think it. Wow, actually thinking about it, it might have been. This isn't really seen as very queer, but it was gender bending. It was just that. Okay, so in 1998, I had my play. I won 24-hour playwriting competition and got my play Hungry done by Theatre Works, and they had this weird ritual thing that they did. Ghani Abdul Karim did a weird sort of dance performance arty thing, all clad in white on top of on Fort Canning Hill, where they have the bicentennial experience, and like they was just in white, like spinning, and like with this speech going on, like this mother explaining to her baby, "This is my vulva." And it was so weird that I go like, yeah, I think that was pretty damn queer, even though I didn't know what exactly I was watching.
I think for me, the first queer theatre, sort of queer, now that I just remember it, it was sort of queer. It's actually by Irfan Kasban, called what is it called? WC. Yeah. So it was the play that I had like backstage access to just because I was doing another play in the same space, and because I was in the Barika program with where Irfan was kind of like guiding us and like leading us, right? So we had help on that, and I feel like that was my first kind of theatre play that was both kind of queer and at the same time was kind of examining the intersections of religion and Malayness as a person, and also I think using religious text as a kind of entry point Yeah,
Yeah, that was intense when I saw
that
it.
was quite intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kenneth, yeah, you get the closing line.
I think, whoa. Okay, I think one of the earliest theater shows that I saw, which I thought was very queer. I don't know how many people know it or have been to it. It's called. It was a place called Igor's that had all these like horror. It was like a Halloween themed place where a lot of, I think, theater actors also acted in, and then they would serve you meals, and then they would come about. It's almost like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but done in Singapore. And my that was when I was like 9, 10, 11 maybe. The only memory I have of that day was my mom just grabbing me by my like shirt, and she was like, "They're singing Share. You better stand up and sing." And looking back, I think that was like the most queer thing I ever seen in my life. I was like, I cannot imagine now, because my parents are not the most open people. But I guess if you're talking about traditional theater shows, then it was the Asian Boys restaging by Wild Rice at the Singapore Theatre Festival.
You're so young.
And I remember, yeah, I know, I'm so sorry. I remembered the sort of staging where the audience had to face each other. And I remember half the play, these gay boys were just all on Grindr trying to hit each other up in the middle of a play, because my friend's phone just kept going bzz, 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 and he's like, the people opposite me are buzzing me. And I thought that was the funniest thing to ever happen. It was like a stroke of like brilliance.
That's audience participation.
Yeah, the true gay theatre experience.
Yeah, I just remember being so amused. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and actually,
well, not me. So.
Yeah. And I realized that we didn't address the second part of the question. So just really quickly before we sign off, what are we working on now? I'm working on a queer anthology with Stephanie called Excel. We're editing it. It was mentioned down in the crawl, and I'm also trying to write a novel about pre-colonial Singapore. Steph?
Yes, I'm also working on Gasp, actually now called Exhale, and just basically collecting and curating queer prose and poetry. And I guess on next Tuesday, 30th of June, is the Plaid Right queer women, non-binary playwriting festival. So my play is going to be read out, except that I put it under my Chinese name in case it sucks. So I'll be less embarrassed.
No, why?
Let's see.
Chan Mani, right?
Yeah, Chan Mani. So
I've had to apply IMDA for you, I know.
Oh no.
All right. Yeah, Kenneth.
Now I've sort of taken a more interdisciplinary sort of approach to my work. So it's longer sort of categorized into acting, writing, and whatever. For now, like for the past year, I've been quite fascinated with hair and makeup. So that's what I've been doing, and try to do a lot more, like bring a lot more queer aesthetic into that, and working with like visual artists and working with like musicians and everything to sort of bring all these themes together, which I find is a sort of refreshing kind of theater that we also sort of do. I think so. Yeah, so that's where I'm sort of headed now. But of course, I'm still, auditioning and sort of writing for stuff here and there.
Okay. Yeah, I can't wait to see more of your stuff. And Hazwan?
I'm working on a full-length play that's meant to be staged next year, hopefully first half of the year. So it's with Rupa Collab. So if you guys just follow us on Facebook, it's RUPACOLAB. So if you look down, I don't know if it's going to be up. Yep, that.
Yeah.
Then you get more details soon enough-ish. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And I think that's it for tonight. Hey, thanks all of you for turning up. This was really, and to all our panelists, Hazwan, Kenneth Chia, and Steph Chan. I'm Ng Yi-Sheng, and this has been a Wild Rice Art and Life. Okay. See you. And happy Dragon Boat Festival. Okay.
Happy
Pride Month.
Bye.
And also Pink Dot.
Okay.